No, Evan is awesome. Evan and I did a conversation. Was it even before Everything Is Its Own Reward?
I think it was right around publication time.
Yeah, so it was like 12 years ago, 11 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
I actually was going to start. So just welcome to Booksmith, everybody. Hi. We're so glad to have you here and so grateful to be doing our first crossover event with our BFFs next door at Alembic. Yes. Booze and books. We've been dreaming of doing this for just about the pandemic plus like a month or two. We were almost ready to start doing it. And then, so we're very happy to all have you all here and to be celebrating with Paul for the new collection of All Over Coffee. You know exactly. And it's a gorgeous book, Paul. And
Thank you.
I just wanted to, in lieu of a bio, because I am in the awkward position of like, instead of reading my own bio, I just want to start with a little story, which is that I moved here in 2009, and it was just a little less than 2 years before, before Everything Is Its Own Reward came out. And I was a totally poor, hustling dreamer with holes in my shoes, and I was starting to write for the Chronicle, but I didn't have a column there yet, and basically was just kind of blogging. And Paul was one of my first, in my head, like serious interviews, and I was so excited to meet him. He was so generous to meet with me because I was like really just a blogger, and we spent like a whole half day, I think, talking. And I was so enraptured by everything that Paul said that I went home and diligently typed up everything we said all day. I mean, we talked in a cafe for hours over numerous cups of coffee, and then he even took me to the studio on Guerrero, was it?
Right.
And showed me behind the scenes, and I was just so excited. I went home and typed up. I mean, it was like 9 or 10,000 words. It was way too long for a blog post.
Literally transcribed every word.
I really did. And I was so excited, and also such an amateur that I really just like posted. I posted it in 2 installments, but I was like, this is cleaned up, but it's faithful to the conversation because everything that Paul said you need to know, basically. I was as happy as I was about that experience. Paul handled it even gracefully by being like, "This is awesome," and as they say, Diane knew it would have been enough if that had been our only interaction. But I'm so happy that as the years have gone by, our paths have crossed numerous times, and we've had the pleasure of hosting Paul for multiple book launches here. We had an art show here, and this was a gallery for a while, and we got to work with Paul on that too and sell his prints here. And it's just been a delight to be able to continue to work with you, Paul.
Thank you.
And thank you guys. I have some notes, but I want to keep this like I think kind of brief. This is a party.
Yeah, we don't want to bore anyone, right? We want you to get back to the bar. That's our main goal.
Which I should say, the bar is open throughout, and feel free, please.
Right, you can go to the bar at any point. Actually,
we're actually not stopping you. We're gonna do what we're gonna do. You guys do what you guys do.
You know, there is a thing, and you know this too. Like, you pay attention to the audience when you're up here, and when they start to like nod off a little or like go to the bathroom and not come back, you realize maybe it's time to shut up. So if I see you going to the bar, I'll wrap it up. What's that? Yeah, nobody comes back from the bar. Yeah. Before you start, I want to thank Evan, and I want to thank the Booksmith. I've done multiple releases here, and I don't. There's a lot of wonderful bookstores in the city, and so, but you guys have this real personal relationship with the authors, and there's it's such a pleasure to release this last book, and also to do it with you because everything is its own reward. You and I had a real relationship with that, and so this book is more than just the next book for me. It's tying up a series and a part of my life, and so doing it here is really special for me. So thank you.
Because I'm also the event manager.
Am I not enunciating properly? Yes.
They can hear me well, but I'm not the point.
Depends on what I say. Yeah.
Well, Paul, tell us what it's like to wrap up a project that you started almost 20 years ago, and obviously the world has changed a lot. You have changed a lot. The work has changed quite a bit. What's the trajectory been like, and what's the experience like wrapping up, like looking back and putting this book together?
Yeah, so 19 years. I created All Over Coffee in September of 2003. So it's I'm not a fan of equating artwork with children. You know, it's not my baby. I think it's an insult to children. Um, but to make that analogy, I'm like, oh wow, All Over Coffee can vote and and tell me to go fuck off and like and do all sorts of things and drive and go off. And really, it's the most monumental because it was what made my career. And so to put the series to bed is really to say, I've built something and now I'm going to continue building. I think the most interesting part is that the work is from 2010 to 2015. And I inadvertently didn't make this collection when I finished the series. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But it kind of sat on the shelf and I kept it in my back pocket. It felt like a savings account. I was telling somebody earlier, like I'm not I'm an independent artist. I'm not a commercial illustrator, but a lot of the commercial artists I know do this thing where they always have to have one project that they don't finish. That like one thing that they can guaranteed get paid for in case they're going to go broke. And they're like, okay, at least I've got that. That's like money in the bank. And I think in a way that work on the shelf for a while felt like that. It's like, okay, if everything crashes and burns, I've got that. And then I hit a point where I realized, you know what, it's time to move on from it and to say goodbye to it and to put it together. So it was a very cathartic experience. And actually writing the essays was a lot more challenging than I had anticipated. I even to my publisher, I was like, this book is going to be easy. I'm going to put it together. It's all like, it's organized. And I'll just write some essays. And then I sat down to write them and I thought, oh, holy shit, I'm actually like reviewing my life. And so it was very cathartic for me.
I love the essays. I've read them all a few times now, and it's so great because one of the things I love about Paul is not just that he's very talented, but he's also very articulate and able to kind of express the knowledge that he has. And it comes through. Also, I love that you write in different modes. Also because you've got the kind of like sticky note post-it you've
Right.
got this kind of tone or and then you've got the narratives and the stories longer and the essays. I love how you are able to sum it up. It makes for a great organizational method for the book, like which is more prominent, I should say, in this book than in the previous two. Like,
Yeah.
Talk to us about that a little bit. What was the decision there?
Well, there was a consciousness to it, right? That's, when I did the first book, it was a celebration of I have this series, it's very popular, and I put the book together, and suddenly the book was an enormous success. And so the second book was, okay, I'm building on this thing. But then the third was, this book is, the work is finished, and I put it away, and now I'm pulling it out, and I felt a bit like an academic of my own life. And I felt a sort of duty in a way. I'm not a big fan of the word posterity. Right, like whatever. Who are we waiting for? But there was a sense of what are the stories that I need to tell about what I made here. I think a good illuminating story for maybe everyone here is, so I started in the Chronicle in February of 2004, and literally the day I launched, I got dozens of emails, and the Chronicle told me. They said, listen, we have to print negative letters. You have to remember, this is 2003. This is 2004. This is really before everybody's commenting on social media, right? And they said, we have to give voice to the negative. And they said, you just got to take it. And at 3 days a week, I'm not exaggerating, 3 days a week for 6 months, there was a battle in the newspaper. And what happened was there were people who were writing because they didn't get it, they didn't understand it, they were angry. And then all the people who loved it got angry at the people who were angry. And so then they wrote letters because nobody writes letters when they're happy. You only write letters when you're mad. Right? Like, and so then there was this thing going. And meanwhile, I'm publishing 4 days a week, which was insanity. I called it Art Boot Camp. And so, like, I would literally turn something at noon. It would go to print at 2. I would go out to draw, finish it at like 2 a.m., get up, see how it printed into paper, read the like crazy email. I would get up and there'd be like 5 emails saying, ignore the letters today. And then I'd go and read the letters. And then I'd go out and draw and finish the piece. And but what happened is about 2 years into it, I started getting these emails saying, hey, you know, I didn't understand what you were doing, but I was walking down the street the other day and the light was hitting the building a certain way. And I remembered a piece that you wrote and I understood it. And all of a sudden, like about 2 years in, I got this wave of like the negatives started going away and a new wave of praise come in. And then about 5 years in, here's the thing, I published the first book and people stopped writing to me. Like I literally got dozens of emails a day until I published a book. And then we sold out the first book in like a month and a half. And I'm like, yay, I'm a success. And then nobody wrote to me. And then the emails I got were, dear Mr. Madonna, I hope you don't mind me writing. And I was like, oh, the newspaper guy. He's the guy where somebody walks up behind him and says, hey, asshole, I didn't like that thing you did. But the book guy was somebody different. My point is there's this whole trajectory that happens in a relationship with an audience, and that the series had a relationship. People had a relationship with the series. And after about 5 years, it became an institution. And I'm not saying that as a braggart. I mean that people stopped. They were like, yeah, it's always been around, right? You've been doing that for like 20 years, right? It just was a thing that was there. And so in writing these essays, it's a very circuitous answer, I know, but I was keeping that in mind, that people have a relationship with it as well. And not that they think about it on a daily level or think about it, you know, at all really, but it showed me how beautiful art is in culture, because it folds into the fabric of our life. And maybe in the beginning it doesn't fold in like seamlessly, and in a way maybe that's beautiful too. Mm-hmm. And I did not understand that relationship of how when you make something new, how it can have a confrontation at first, until I experienced it firsthand. And I'm so grateful for that experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't think about the arc of the public and the audience in real time. And I as soon as you started saying about the comments and the negative letters, it's like, oh, when did that change and how many times did it change? But how parallel was your own engagement with the work, with the feedback? Because I think you started to notice a shift at some point, and you know, was it right before the first collection ended? It was a little, you talk about it in the essay. I don't want to give all the spoilers, but
no, there's no spoilers.
There's no spoilers, you guys.
No. I think it was Jonathan Franzen that said, if your books are relying on a spoiler, then it's not a very good story. Yeah, right? Like, here's something. There's a relationship with praise and criticism that is equal. And they are the same mechanism. And I realized that I began to steel myself against the criticism that came in early on. And what happened was that I was unable, in order to protect myself from that and just work. And here's the thing, being busy is the best protection from anything. And because I'm like, I have no time I listened to it. It's not that I ignored it, but I couldn't let it affect me on a daily level. And I think that's where that 2-year mark really said, okay, you know, don't pay attention to the moment by moment. There's a larger arc at play here. But what happened was, for a long time, I was unable to accept praise because I had steeled myself against criticism. I'm not sure if that's a great answer to, but it took me a long time to sort of unwind from that.
Yeah.
And I think I shut off for a long time. I was just like, great, thank you. In the same way somebody like you suck, I'd be like, great, thanks, whatever. Like, it was all whatever for a while. I'm just doing what I'm doing.
Interesting. Yeah, and I mean, I know that like the approach, I mean, I think you speak a couple times throughout the book about how in some way the concept of the strip originally was about relationships and about how you're kind of deconstructing the way things are typically related and kind of flipping them on their heads in a way. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that's fair.
When did that change? I mean, how did that change after the first book and then, you know, maybe between the second and the third? How are the books different?
I think because we can only work with theoretical concepts for so long, right? Like, you do it. You're like, oh, I got this idea. I'm going to try this thing. And you do it. and either you move on or it has to evolve. And so here's the thing: All Over Coffee, the title. People get it wrong all the time. I'm asked about it forever. I had two titles. The first was Under a Wire Sky, and the other was All Over Coffee. And I thought, under or over? Which how do you feel? I don't want to feel under anything. I want to feel over something. And All Over Coffee was about my early days in San Francisco, where I was broke, living in a flat with 13 people. I just went to cafes to write and draw every day. So all my work was done over coffee. Mm-hmm. That's where the title came from. But it also symbolized for me an opened container. Mm-hmm. Conceptually, I could explore and do new things. And so, there are several pieces. If you were to review all the work, there's a theme I refer to again and again, which is go back to where you think you started. Now, the important part of that phrase is where you think. Because going back to where you started after you've been there means you're not going to go back to the same place. But it's always about returning to basics. And so that was how I tried to keep the series alive and try to return to that sort of wabi-sabi of just let it happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, it's interesting how you say you kind of steeled yourself against criticism, which both bad and good. But for me, All Over Coffee has always represented this very kind of open space where any random interactions can take you in any direction. And so that makes me wonder what the relationship is or has been for you, like emotionally, like on a daily personal basis versus like the creation of this work. Is that too broad of a question?
No, actually, it's a really interesting question because, to be frank, I was done about a year before I left the Chronicle. I knew I was done. And had I been honoring only my sort of creative impulses, I would have left then. But I stayed out of fear, which a good friend of mine, the author Glenn David Gold, we were having coffee and we were having this conversation. And he said, "Why are you staying?" And I said, "Because I'm afraid." And he goes, "Oh, yeah, because that's a great reason to do anything." And he said it in such a way that it was just like, hurt and made me laugh. But I was terrified of waking up in the middle of the night going, what have I given up? Because that connection through a newspaper, and the reason I told the story, like that little anecdote about like the newspaper person, man, woman, whatever, human, who somebody walks up, like there is that thing of like the newspaper person is the person on the street. The book person is removed. It's different. And I was like, I'm never going to get this opportunity again. I don't care how successful I am, how many opportunities I get to publish. That will never appear in the same way. And I didn't want to let it go, to be honest. And ironically, when I finally did let it go, I woke up in the middle of the night with a sense of relief. I totally digressed and forgot your question.
It's okay. I get both of those things so strongly.
And I promised everybody they could go to the bar, too. And yeah, we're still here. Sorry, what was your question? Remind me.
I don't remember. I was on the trip with you. I want to go.
That's All Over Coffee, though, maybe, right? Like that sort of wandering. Just let it happen.
Well, I want to go straight onto the next dream.
Okay.
And what I want to ask about that is in one of the essays you mentioned how you had that phrase before you knew that the column was gonna end, like before the end was imminent or even in sight. You just knew one day this is gonna end and probably I'm gonna keep going and do other things.
Yeah.
And this phrase came to you. And what I'm wondering is you knew, you kind of like acknowledged, okay, this phrase I'm gonna write down. I'm going to use this. This is going to be, I think you said in the essay, like these are the last words of my strip.
Yeah.
Whenever it's time for that, I'm going to get to these words somehow, which I think is just great. And I'm wondering, like, how do you track moments like that when you have them? I mean, first you have to be attuned to your inner life.
Exactly.
Right. But then what? What instigates that moment in the future when you're like, oh, here's like, how did you know? Oh, on to the next dream. Can I?
I remember distinctly the moment I was walking up 15th Street, like towards Dolores, and I was thinking about that how lucky I was to have a dream come true. Here I was, like my dream wasn't specific. It was, I want to draw and write and do that for a living. Right. Like it's like whatever, however that manifested, I didn't know. And I was having that thought of like, yeah, I'm grateful for the life that I have. And then I realized, wow, what do you do after you have a dream come true? Like, do you just stop there? Like, what do you do? And I'm like, no, you go on to the next dream. I was like, oh, that's a good line. It's got a good ring to it. And I wrote it down. I was like, well, that's what happens when you leave something. You move on to the next dream. And so it was abstract in that sense. It wasn't really specific to, I'm going to end All Over Coffee and that's the end of Vogue. It was, no, I'm going to end this period of my life. And when that comes, I don't know when that comes, it will reveal itself to me, and that's what it will mean. And I suppose too, you know, when we arrive at those moments, we check with ourselves, was that premonition actually true? So here's the thing, I was an obsessive note taker for probably a decade. Like I was the annoying guy who in every social situation would be in the middle of a conversation, I'd just start writing something out. And you're probably like, what did I do that he's and I'm like, it has nothing to do with you.
Are you writing me a ticket right now?
Probably even worse. Right. Like, I'm like, oh, it has nothing to do with you. And you're like, oh, you're not even like with me now. But then I read this interview with Hemingway, who said that there was a period of time that he was writing where he would stop at noon every day, even if he was in the middle of a sentence. And he said if an idea was good enough, it would be there tomorrow. And I thought, oh, I'm going to try that. I want to test it. And what I found was I would remember ideas I had 10 years ago when the moment was right. And it gave me this trust that it all is just there. It's kind of like you get a smell, like you walk by somebody and they're wearing a perfume or a detergent or something, and you remember being 8 years old and at the beach with your family, and you hadn't thought about that for 30 years, and you're like, I needed something to trigger it. As long as the trigger was there, the memory came up.
You have access to everything, yeah.
And the same thing, I would make a drawing, and it would trigger a thought I had 20 years ago. And I thought, it's fine. I don't need to write everything down anymore. I'm free. I'm free of this habit. Because, like, and it's good. Habits, it's good. It taught me a lot of things. It probably trained my brain as well.
I was going to ask if you're still a note taker.
Not in that way.
Yeah.
I feel that a burden has been lifted to some extent.
Just like the column, huh?
Yeah, only because a weekly deadline is...
Sure.
How many people here watch the series Lost? All right. For you people, do you remember Desmond and the button? Yeah, he could only venture so far out before he had to return and press the button. For those of you who don't know, apologies for the random pop culture reference. Listen, I think that there is always a conflict, at least with me, between what needs to be done in the practical world and what needs to be done in the creative world. And those, like, one keeps you on the ground, the other is keeping you floating. And I don't know that I need to be wholly set free from the ground. I don't think that's good for people who are floating too far. It doesn't mean they make better work. But I think that, you know, I stayed for a year with All Over Coffee because of practical reasons, really, and emotional reasons. I mean, it was a relationship to an audience that I was afraid to leave.
Sure. Well, you know exactly what to do, right? I mean, if I may.
Well, maybe we end on that. You want to talk about that? Like,
yeah, I did want to just ask. I mean, I have so many things to ask around that, which is everything from, you know, talk to us about the method of that language and how that appeared, or you know, you could go the route of what is it that you have to do now? I'm interested in. You know, do you know what you have to do when you know?
Yeah, I do. I'm one of those weird people that have, like, I have a sense of, like, what I'm doing my entire life. Like, I know, I can't tell you what I'm doing 2 years from now exactly, but I know, like, I have a sense of whether I'm on the path or not. I'm not a religious person, but it's funny, I really, at times, I can identify with people who have religious callings because I'm like, oh, we kind of use the same language. And that, I think, is the closest thing I can understand to empathy, right? It's like, I don't subscribe to maybe this person's beliefs, but I can understand the ideology they're talking about through my own. And maybe that is the most important thing we can do as people, right? Like, I don't have to believe the same thing as you, but I've got my own thing. And yeah. Sorry, I wandered on that.
Well, and you gotta kind of trust that thing. It's
Right,
that's,
you got
that's
to
part
follow.
of it.
I follow that.
What I love so much about exactly make something, and this kind of like kind of subsection you call it maybe at some point, like this
Oh, right, the subsets. Yes.
subset of these pieces is it's so for those of you who don't know, they emerged in part. I don't know, you could tell the story probably better than I can, right? But the Paul was having a show at Open Studios, one of our arts band's annual open, where you can visit the artists in their studios, and Paul, had all of his tools out and his work out, of course, and he had some Post-it notes on his wall because he kept the studio true, I think, to how as a workplace
Right.
to some degree.
I wanted people to see how I worked. Yeah.
And one of his friends, kind of quoted something that was off of the Post-it note to Paul, and was just like, "Yeah, that really resonates." And Paul's like, "Wait, where's that from? It's not in my work, And it was just in one of the Post-it notes, and this language then this mode of writing got kind of incorporated into the images in a way that I think is some of the stronger relationship between language and images, and the reason for that for me is that it's so much more, the tone is like you're obviously kind of speaking to yourself. And I'm just wondering, like, yeah, I don't know, I have lots of questions, but I don't want to take all of our time.
It's good. So I write, part of that note-taking obsessiveness is that I write notes to myself. Do I have one? No, I don't. Actually, I give it to Joan because I gave you my note earlier today that had like a grocery list, but then it also have little notes to myself about like these weird little, just like, this is what you need to think about today, or and I used to just put them all around my drawing table, and exactly what you have to do is one of them, and those were not art pieces at the time. Those were just these notes to myself of like, how to stay on track, or it's almost like I was acting as a professor for myself and giving myself guidance. And Steve, who's not here tonight, curiously, because he's in Portland and has COVID, poor guy, but good friend, very good friend, and he would like to be here tonight. He came out and we'd look in his eyes, and he had responded off of one of the notes that I had by my desk, and only later did I learn how it had applied specifically to his life personally. But when he said that, I sort of woke up. I realized, I'm writing these things to myself that I want to see every day. If it's important to me, why shouldn't it be important to everyone else? And so I began this whole series of what I called wall pieces, which I infused the writing onto the wall as a cliche, right? The writing on the wall, like the writing's always on the wall and we never see it, which is exactly what it was. I was posting these notes on the wall and I didn't see them. So it took somebody else to point it out to me, which is really beautiful. And I'm happy to share that story, right? I wrote it in the book. I'm happy to share it now because I think I get asked creative questions all the time. And some of them is, sometimes the answer is, you don't know. Sometimes you know exactly what you have to do, and sometimes you're oblivious, and you just got to listen to other
Sometimes
people.
what you have to do is figure out what you have to do.
Or listen to somebody else who walks up to you and says this.
Yes. Oh, should we see if anybody has a burning question?
Yeah, does anybody have a burning question or just a question?
Doesn't have to be on fire. I can only meet you like this far.
Well, I was just curious about the thing you started talking about, which is what are you doing with the rest of your life?
So, small question for those in the back. What are you doing with the rest of your life,
Yeah.
Paul?
Can we all just pause for a moment with the question and consider if you were on stage and being asked that? Like, just take a moment to embody that. Yeah, we'll focus on the professional part. So I wrote that to myself because I was beginning to make the switch to long form books, which was really a step into a different professional world. And while I had some credibility from the world I was coming from, I was new in the world I was stepping into. And there was a lot of humility stepping into that because I had some ego of, oh, I've accomplished this. And they were like, it's almost like you switch colleges and they're like, none of these credits matter.
Do not apply.
You're like, nah, I don't care how many all-nighters you pulled. But I knew I needed to go there. And so here's something too. When nobody knows who you are, you're free to make creative choices and change. But for the first time in my life, I had something to lose. I had something that had value, and I had to look at it and say, wait a minute, if I'm pivoting away from this, why am I doing that? Is this angsty? Is this, am I being rebellious? Why would I give up this thing that I've created? Like, it's unique. And I worked hard enough to know how unique it was to have accomplished that. And so there was a sense of following that, like, I need to do it. So, check yourself, but keep going forward.
And the rest of your life.
Yeah, you notice how I avoided that part of it?
I got
Thanks,
Who
John.
the hell knows with the rest of the life, right? Yeah. Hello.
Paul, I've got a question for you because over
Okay.
the years I've really, like all of us, have really enjoyed your work. The illustrations have been staggering from early on, and the words have had somehow a humanizing capture without people there. And then at first it might actually seem a little bit like they're disassociated, but there's actually something that brings it together, and that's been the part that I enjoy every single thing you put out. It's really wonderful. I look for it, and it's a journey. Sometimes it's really obvious. For example, I remember one where it's about two different, like, days are short, years fly by.
Oh, yeah.
That
Mhm.
that picture is a road going up and a road diving down. San Francisco, totally through and through. So I'm wondering about this, like, you know exactly what you need to do. If you wouldn't mind this one time walking us through why that picture in that text is so perfect.
What I like about that piece is that it's dark
Yeah.
because you're not sure.
Thank you.
Like, there's a little sense, like, it's ominous. There's a little bit like, am I getting the, like, feed from the alien mothership? Or am I listening to my soul? Right? Because if you look at it, the foreground is all very dark. The trees are bare. The only part of the wall, is illuminated. And it's a very dark and heavy piece. And even like when we did the text for the cover, we put this like heavy shadow on it. Mm-hmm. When I look at it next to the other books, I'm like, man, where did I go? Like, whoo, this went kind of like, whoo, down into a, but I think that tension is important. If it were bright and airy, then it would be a little too just like the kitten hanging from the tree. Hang in there, right? Right. But when it's a little dark, you're like, ooh, do I know? And I think that there's a veil between, we all know we have to do whatever that is personal to us. But I think that what keeps us from enacting it is, it's fear, right? And I think fear is a really important part, kind of surprisingly a part of this conversation tonight, right? Talking about leaving all over coffee, talking about moving forward and taking steps despite fear. And that tension in that piece. But here's the thing. I didn't know that. Like, I didn't consciously go in and be like, I am going to make this piece tense with darkness and, concept it that way. No, I was walking along and I remember it was after an open studio, actually. And I went out to scout for that piece and I walked around for hours. And then I found that site and I was like, this is the one I want to draw. Only afterward. The rest of it is sort of intellectual bullshit to some extent. I mean, it's not really, but like,
Well,
did I know
maybe
it?
to you, but it's open enough in the book, right? Where
Right, but
somebody else encounters
did I know
it.
it consciously? No, but I think that it's not bullshit. I'm just trying to relieve the arrogance of saying that, like, oh, I constructed this super conscious thing, right?
But you did, and that's why we're here.
Right, but it's important for everybody who wants to make things. Thank you. But I think it's important for everybody who wants to make things to know that there is this always unconscious thing going on. And part of exactly what you have to do is following that. I don't really know, but but I know,
Yeah.
right? Like, why am I walking this? I don't know, but I have to. It's 51-49, 51%. I'm yes. So I keep going, right? Like, only later do you get to be on stage and be like, oh, I did that because
totally
of
knew
this
what I was
reason, and because I'm awesome, and but really that doesn't serve anybody. What serves, and that's the whole. I mean, All Over Coffee. I hope was always that sort of transparency of, I don't know, I'm just doing this thing.
It for me always felt like, and I didn't actually know the wall writings came from sticky notes until reading this book, honestly, in the essay. But it always felt to me like you were drawing and writing these for yourself, kind of, like you were, like it was like writing a note to yourself, even though it was a beautifully constructed and composed note without words, maybe, but like that act of, I want to say creation, but like entering your inner space, like that was like mostly a personal thing, like not that you knew exactly what was going to happen in the piece, right?
Right.
But that you were accessing that place.
Emotionally accessing.
Right.
I think about music, like love songs that are written out of heartbreak. They're always written really towards one person, right? Like there's an emotional experience that happens, and yet tons of everybody identifies with it. And there is this concept that when you write about the specific, the general applies, and when you write about the general, the specific applies. And when we write to one person, everybody who reads it thinks they're that person. And I think you could probably fake it, right, and say I'm going to do this, but it works when we're doing it genuinely.
Right. Yeah. Amen.
Cheers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's more of a comment. What I connect with about your work is that there's this tremendous sense of gesture. I mean, I think this is kind of what you both were getting at a moment ago, that there's this tremendous sense of intimacy about the image and the words, where it does feel a bit like a note to yourself, but it's public, it's writ large, and it comes from the heart. And to me, it's about the story of coming to this city and sort of seeking. There's a seeking gesture behind it, and that's what I love about it. That's what I think makes it so real.
Thanks. We'll take one more, and then maybe we'll wrap it up.
Sure. I'll repeat. Yeah, go for it.
Don't sound like a cranky old man.
But
I cry at the loss of the printed image,
Mm.
and things are moving over to digital. I used to have an address book where I would have my friends write their addresses in it as I was traveling. Now I've got a digital address book. What are your thoughts about the printed image on a daily newspaper subsiding and going to digital, and what are you picking up and feeling and looking at an intimate daily basis these days?
What am I picking up? And
Yeah, so the question was with bemoaning a non cranky gentleman in the audience is wanting to know with the waning of print images, how do you feel about the transition to digital? Is that fair enough? Yeah.
I don't sweat the small stuff. I think the funniest joke or meme that goes around, sorry to use that, but is that like when books became readily available, there was a big like cultural, like, oh, people were reading too much, put those books down. And now we're like, people don't read enough. They look at their phone. I think that content is content. I don't know. I like to make drawings. I like the craft of, I stretch paper. I like the paper I use. I like the ink. If you come to my studio, I dork out for 30 minutes about what it means to stretch paper, right? Like, be grateful none of you were there right now. but I like that. But I like it. I'm not doing it because I'm like, we have to hold on to it. I don't know. I don't think about it. I don't worry about it. I think that it's not really anything to worry about. Actually.
What are you picking up and reading?
Oh, I'm reading this Italian author right now. Does anybody know who Montalbano is? Montalbano's awesome. Yeah, I'm reading all of yeah. So I always keep a book in my bag. I always keep a paperback. But I don't read nearly as much as I would like to be frank. And which really bothers me as an author. And actually helps me write, because sometimes I'm writing and I'm like, yeah, that went on for way too long. Nobody gives a shit. Like, no one's going to care. I just delete that in like 3 sentences instead of 3 pages. But interestingly, All Over Coffee really taught me how to be succinct. You know, that was one of the things that I did. And you talk about those, the sticky notes, is how do you know, if you can say it in one sentence, why did you bother write the page? Right? Like, and interestingly, I'm going to make a weird jump. But I think that the tech world actually really embraces that too. How do you boil an idea down to its simplest, most effective thing? And I'm somebody that believes that arts and sciences should have never really been disassociated.
In separate buildings.
Right. Like, I think creativity and innovation and experimentation are concepts that should not be divided by the tools that you use. So I just totally went off. And everybody should drink now.
Yeah, let's hear it for Paul Madonna.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I really, you're very kind. Thank you.
And for being here to celebrate this beautiful book. Thank you all. To those of you who purchased it from Booksmith, if you haven't, do not fear. It's not too late. We have books in the corner of the bar by the window. The bar is open till 9 tonight. Please feel free to hang out until then. And the room next door between us and the bar, which is our fiction poetry room, will stay open. And Paul will be signing. If you got a book or are going to get a book, Paul will be happy to personalize in the corner.
That I will.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so
Sincerely.
much.
All right. Cheers.